Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. I'm Richard Harris, your host. So glad you could be joining us today. Have you ever seen the Peanuts cartoon strip in the newspaper or ever watched a Charlie Brown movie? You remember his cousin Lucy, right? She was the ornery, cranky relative. She was a child, but she always used to hold the football for Charlie so he could kick it. And do you remember that whenever he got close to the ball, was about to kick it, she would pull it away and Charlie Brown would go flying. You know, it didn't matter how many times she did that. She was always able to convince Charlie to keep coming back, to keep trying to kick the ball. And she always told him, oh, this time I mean it. This time I won't do it. Don't worry, don't worry. And he would fall for it every time. Do you know that's how it is with environmentalism in America today? The climate change hoax continually tells us the earth is warming and man is to blame. They claim we're putting out CO2 or carbon dioxide in such large quantities that it's creating a greenhouse effect. In other words, it's going up into the high atmosphere and trapping heat in the earth. And they say that CO2 is coming from fossil fuels. You know, those nasty things like oil and coal and natural gas, which are supposedly created by decaying fossils, right? So they're wrong on that count too, but that's another matter. They say if we don't do something drastic now, we're all going to die. All life on earth is going to be extinguished. And all the industrialized countries, the Western countries, all of them, that is, except maybe China and India, sign on to these major agreements because they buy into the hysteria, like the Paris Accords or the Kyoto Protocol. Western governments spend billions of dollars on so-called green energy. The United States then sends hundreds of billions of dollars around the world to get other governments to do green stuff. You know, even without the green energy stuff, the United States of America has the cleanest air that it's had in 60 years. And yet we're spending billions and billions of dollars on wind farms and solar farms, and we're churning out electric cars paid for with government subsidies. We're shutting down coal plants. You know, let me just pause for a second and tell you. One time I had a chance to go to Craig, Colorado, and was visiting with a man who worked in the coal plant there, the energy plant that ran off coal. He said that this is a scientific fact, if you went up and tested the cleanness of the air that is going out of the plant, the exhaust, that it's cleaner than the air that we breathe. And yet the liberals in Denver won't allow people to buy coal from that plant. The state of Colorado buys energy from other places that use coal, but won't let people buy it from our own coal-producing energy plant. But despite all of these efforts in America to be green and to create clean energy, so-called, the climate continues to supposedly warm. And maybe it's, you know, why is that if we're doing all this and it's not making any difference? Why should we keep going? Well, maybe it's because the nations of the world that put out the most CO2 into the atmosphere are not interested in reducing emissions, like China and India, who together have, you know, 1/4 to 1/3 of the world's population. Us over here in America with 5% of the world's population are supposedly able to make a meaningful difference. And there's maybe it's not that though. Maybe it's because this whole thing is a hoax, right? Well, Richard, the graphs show the world is warming. The world is warming. You know, maybe the world is warming in the, you know, modern age, but maybe it's not because of man. Have you ever thought about that? Maybe it's because of a natural cycle that's going on. Maybe it has to do with the sun and the oceans and the fact that the earth goes through these cycles of heating and cooling regardless of what we do. You know, in the 1960s, the environmental scare was overpopulation. They predicted mass starvation, depletion of natural resources, and they called it the population bomb. You might even remember a book coming out with that title. The first Earth Day was called for and held in 1970. Paul Ehrlich, who was one of the leading so-called environmentalists of his day, said, "Population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increases in food supply we make." Paul, he said confidently in April 1970 in the issue of Mademoiselle magazine. He went on to say the death rate will increase until at least 100 to 200 million people per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years. Well, that didn't happen. You know, the Earth's population has gone from 2.6 billion in 1960 to 8.4 billion in 2025, and we're doing just fine. You see, God made this world. He made this earth and designed it for mankind to live on. He set up a system that is going to be able to support mankind until he blows the whistle, until he says, okay, guys, time's up. We're going to do something different. He wouldn't have designed a world that was incapable of supporting us. You see, there are vast, vast areas of undeveloped land left in the world. And the more we grow, the more technology advances, the more capable we are of raising crops, raising, livestock, and developing food supplies and water supplies. As technology increases, we have greater capacity to develop the earth. There's plenty of land. I remember back in the 1970s, the new ice age fears. They said then that particulates in the atmosphere from wood stoves, from industrial smokestacks, from cars and, other things like that were blocking solar radiation. Right now we're trapping it. Then we were blocking it. And supposedly they said, we're going to cause a new ice age. Temperatures are dropping. That's only 50 years ago. In 1975, a one-page article appeared in the April 28th issue of, I believe it was Newsweek, and it was called The Cooling World, written by Peter Gwynn. You can see it here. Look at the title on the chart. It says, Areas of the Earth Affected by Climate Change. Well, we hear that word climate change today, don't we? Except today we're told it's global warming. Then we were told it was global cooling. Time magazine, 1974, ran an article entitled Another Ice Age, which discussed scientific speculation about a cooling trend. In 1979, they also ran an article, The Cooling of America. So it referred to wood-burning stoves as an energy crisis. Yeah. This is a lot like also in the 80s, the next wave came along. In the 80s, you remember the ozone layer scare? They told us, aerosols, that hairspray you're using and that deodorant you're spraying under your arm and everything else that has aerosol in a can with aerosol, it's destroying the ozone layer because there's this hole. There's a hole in the ozone layer over the South Pole and it's growing and we're all going to die because this ozone filters out ultraviolet radiation. Do you remember this scare? So what did they do? They passed bans. They started banning aerosol cans. They even banned the sale of Freon in a can. Remember in the old days, we used to be able to change the Freon in our air conditioners on our cars? Well, they took that away from us. Now you have to go pay, $1,200 to get your air conditioner recharged at a professional mechanic. Why? Because the Freon would damage the ozone layer. Well, a few years later, they quietly admitted, oh, sorry, that hole in the ozone layer, it's always been there. We didn't realize it. Yeah, it's normal. Oh, yeah, it gets bigger and sometimes smaller over time, back and forth. Don't worry, it's okay. Hey, sorry to have bothered you. This climate change scare also reminds me of the energy crisis of the 70s. You remember Jimmy Carter, President Carter in 1970s, sitting at the Oval Office desk in a cardigan sweater, telling us to turn our thermostats down? I was pretty much a kid then, but I still remember it. You remember hearing in school in the early 80s how the world was going to run out of oil in 50 years? All of these predictions are completely false. The earth creates fuel sources, fossil fuels in abundance, and we are in no danger of running out of oil ever. Well, that's how it is with the modern climate change crisis. Do you guys remember Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth movie pushed by Michael Moore? all the alarmism. They told us the polar ice caps are melting. Do you remember the picture, the video of a sad polar bear on its little tiny piece of ice floating out alone into the ocean to die? And now, folks, they're discovering that, wait, polar bear populations are actually stabilizing. Yeah, and even growing and thriving. Remember how they said oceans would rise and coastal areas would be flooded? They even made an apocalyptic film called 2012 that showed New York City underwater. But now, folks, Bill Gates, if anybody's connected, it's Bill Gates. He just issued a report in December saying, well, climate change really isn't that big of a deal. It doesn't pose a severe threat to human existence, and it doesn't really warrant the extreme measures that everyone has been pushing. Well, it's a lot like Charlie Brown, isn't it? I want you to remember Charlie Brown and Lucy. How many times are we going to let the environmentalist extremists hold the football for us and say, hey, come kick the ball, come kick the ball, come kick the ball. I won't move it, I promise. Oh, I was just kidding last time. I was just a joke last time. This time it's for real. It's not for real. It's not for real because we know the Bible and we know what God has said. And he said that as long as seed time and harvest time remain, okay, we're going to be here on this earth. God has set in place seasons. He has provided for us what we need to live and to thrive on this planet. We don't need to worry about wiping civilization out with our own ability. This is not going to happen. Now, does that mean we should sit back and be cavalier and be reckless? Well, no, it doesn't, because we are stewards of our environment. We are stewards of the good things that God has given us. If we recognize that a species is endangered of extinction, we should take reasonable efforts to preserve it. We shouldn't go cutting down vast swaths of forest without regard for repopulating that forest. And we shouldn't put pollutants into the atmosphere that are going to harm people. But the whole climate change thing, it's just not true. It's not bearing fruit. And especially the part of it that says that man is causing this, right? So what we've got to do in our culture and in our society, when we hear these claims and we see these claims, we've got to measure it against what the Holy Spirit is saying. Does this seem to be true based on the Spirit inside of us? And does it line up with the Word of God? And is it well established by facts and evidence? You really need all three. And here to discuss this issue with me in more detail is the Honorable Jason Isaac. He's the founder and CEO of the American Energy Institute. It's a trade association that works to advance the human condition through access to affordable and reliable energy. I just want to pause for a second and tell you, the access to energy, to electricity and other forms of reliable energy is a key component to advanced human civilization, to a standard of living that is reasonable and comfortable. Without it, we live in primitive third world conditions, without access to medicine, food, water, shelter, not to mention all the technology that makes life possible in this day and time. Well, Jason Isaac has appeared live on Fox News, Fox Business, and other national news programs. His commentaries have been published by Fox News, The Hill, The Washington Examiner, The Daily Caller, and other outlets. Prior to launching the American Energy Institute, he was elected 4 times as a state representative for Hays and Blanco counties in Texas, in the Hill Country there in Texas. He served on the Energy Resources and Environmental Regulation Committees, among others. He's a graduate of Stephen F. Austin State University, and he lives in the San Antonio area with his wife. And we're just really honored to have him joining us on the program today. Before we go to a little break to share some information, I wanted to mention to you we have a brand new product giveaway. Now, this booklet is one that I wrote. It's called The Calling to Manhood. Do you know today we're in a crisis because men don't know who they are and women don't know who they are? You see, the devil's been telling men, you ought to be more like women. Been telling women, you ought to be more like men. And everybody doesn't understand that God created the sexes and that you have an identity as a male, you have an identity as a female, and you're good enough the way you're made. And to know what is it we're made to do. And we're called to live out that identity for the glory of God. And in this booklet, I cover these biblical truths, and I talk about what is it that men are called to do, because all men have this in common. We're called to work, we're called to lead, and we're called to fight. These are not toxic, these are good things. Get a copy of this book today by going to truthandlibertygtn.com, and we'll give it to you for free if you share your email address with us. And also, I wanted to mention, if you're not familiar with our website, go there today at Truth and Liberty, our regular website, truthandliberty.net, to find out more about what we're doing here at Truth and Liberty. All right, so don't go away. I'm going to share an announcement with you, and then I'll be right back with our guest for today, the Honorable Jason Isaac.
Now more than ever, America needs men of steadfast faith, men who lead with courage, guard truth, and protect freedom, even in seasons of loss. The Calling to Manhood by Richard Harris is a guide to living that God-given purpose. When the world feels shaken, let this be your call to stand strong for your family, your community, and our nation. Rise up, stay faithful, and make a difference. Order your copy today.
All right, folks, welcome back to Truth and Liberty. My guest today is the Honorable Jason Isaac, who I shared his bio with you at the end of the monologue section. Jason, thank you so much for joining me here on Truth and Liberty today.
Richard, great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. Well, I saw you speak at a recent event in Texas, and I was just blown away by how clearly and articulately, how I just non-articulately said that, but you presented a defense or a rebuttal to modern climate change, extremism, and was just so impressed, sir. I'd like you to, let's just start off today. If you could just share with the viewers your organization, what it is, and what you do.
Well, thanks so much, Richard, again, for having me on. I appreciate it. Again, I'm Jason Isaac, and I'm the CEO of the American Energy Institute. We're a trade organization that represents American energy producers, primarily in the oil, gas, coal, and nuclear space, that unabashedly support free markets, that are actually okay with me advocating for policies that reduce the cost of energy. And we push back against European political agendas, things like ESG, which really stands for environmental, social, and governance, but I say it stands for everyone's suffering guaranteed. We push back on DEI, net zero, decarbonization, the Paris Climate Accords. Really, the climate alarmist narrative are things that we push back on to promote affordable and reliable and preferably American energy. And I say preferably American because we produce it more responsibly than anywhere else on the planet.
Well, fantastic. Well, Jason, how do you do that with a clean conscience?
Well, it's so funny. I've testified in front of Congress several times, and I love to introduce myself and tell the members of Congress, I live a high carbon lifestyle. And I think the rest of the world should too. And it was the congressman from Maryland, Jamie Raskin, that kind of pointed his finger at me and called me a carbon king. And after sitting there for about 4 hours, that was the only notes that I had taken. And I'm a marketing guy. And I thought, gosh, Carbon King, he's trying to insult me, but I think I'm going to take that and run with it. It's now my license plate. It's on my business card. It's on my name tags. I embrace it. I really do think that people should live a high carbon lifestyle. And I say that because when you look at places that live a low carbon lifestyle, they're living in poverty and they're living in energy poverty. And things that we take for granted, they don't even have access to. Affordable, clean, running water, something we're number one in the world for having access to here in the United States. They don't have access to clean air. They cook over an open stove, usually in a contained home or a hut or some sort of dwelling. They're using biomass, animal dungs, coal over an open flame. They're not using pollution control technology. They're not walking over and plugging something into a socket. They're not turning a microwave on. And so we need to get those people. It's 7 billion people on the planet. Approximately 7/8 of the global population would love to experience what we take for granted here in the United States. And that's powered by affordable, reliable American energy.
Boy, let's unpack that just a little bit more. How much is the standard of living affected? How much is our quality of life affected by access to energy sources that are fueled by what they call fossil fuels?
Yeah, I would say our Secretary of Energy does a great job of explaining this and doesn't talk about energy as being part of the economy. He talks about energy being the economy, really the heart of the economy. Over 96% of the products that you and I are going to wear, consume, live in, ride in, or on today are made possible by petroleum products. And those petroleum products are refined using electricity that used to be predominantly made from coal. We've gone away from that because of some of the climate alarmist narratives over the years. But you look at what's happening over winter here in the United States. Coal is keeping grids powered, they're keeping homes warm, and we need to be producing more of that here in the United States to expand infrastructure into artificial intelligence and data centers. Those should be powered by coal as we turned in petroleum products into refined goods that we're going to use and consume on a daily basis. Again, over 96% of the products that we're going to use today are made possible by petroleum.
Well, how did you personally get involved in all of this energy issue, and kind of what persuaded you to be on this side of this whole massive debate? Can you tell us your story?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I first started working when I was 12 years old, and I joke, I'm not joking. I was cleaning up after animals, and I said a few decades later, I ran for policy, public office, because I felt compelled to do the same thing again. But I did. I started out working at a very young age, and my first real job where I had taxes taken out, I wasn't working for cash, mowing lawns and doing things like that. I was 14 years old. I hope I don't get an IRS audit from this, but at 14 years old, I started working at a gas station. And really seeing people, commuters, and the fuel and the freedom that provided to people, the ability to get around to and from work was made possible by the gasoline that I was pumping in their tanks. And so I thought, wow, this is pretty neat. Learned about the density of the energy, the different types of energy, gasoline and diesel, different automotive interests. So I really got interested in that particular industry. Studied marketing in college, and immediately went to go work for a manufacturing company that manufactured components for trucking companies. So I got into marketing, safety systems, and other drivetrains and components for trucking companies, and learned more about the different industries that rely on trucking services. I had a customer in northern New Mexico that took coal ash from the coal-fired power plant and was paid to take that coal ash away, and then would sell it to concrete companies that were mixing it and making highways and sidewalks because it made concrete lighter. So I learned about the waste from power plants and what we were doing with that waste. It certainly wasn't going into the air. It was being captured. I worked for companies that hauled oil in the oil field, that hauled diesel and jet fuel and other transportation fuels. So it was a really good eye-opening experience for me. And so when I ran for office and got elected in 2010, sworn in 2011, I thought, people aren't really hearing the good story about not only our environmental leadership, but our economic prosperity that's made possible by access to affordable and reliable energy. And so I served on the Environmental Resources Committee, the Energy Resources Committee, and learned and try to educate people more about that leadership that we have here in this United States, that a vast majority of the global population would love to experience, the economic prosperity and our environmental leadership that we have here. And those two things go hand in hand. They're not possible without one or the other.
Well, Jason, let's talk about this whole thing of climate change, as they're calling it now. When it started, it was global warming, and then they kind of shifted on us, and now they call it climate change. I think that has a lot more wiggle room for them in it, is why they went that direction. But, as I was researching this subject, I saw that, wait, that's not a new term, climate change. They used that same term back in the 70s when they were telling us the Earth was cooling and we were headed for a new ice age. Climate change we're told today that 99% of scientists agree with the whole global warming thing. There's two questions that are embedded, and they don't ever pull them apart. One of them is the Earth getting warmer? And the second question, though, is what's causing it? Is it man or is it natural processes? Can you just share with us, is mankind, through fossil fuels, causing the Earth to get hotter?
It's great. You talk about the 97%. That's a number that the left typically loves to use. 97% agree that mans are causing climate change. But if you look into the studies where they got this from, they went and looked at research papers from hundreds of scientists that really had any kind of reference to man and climate. So it didn't say that man was contributing to the climate changing, but they've come out with this fake number to say that 97% of the scientists agree that man is causing a catastrophic climate crisis. That couldn't be further from the truth. I've written extensively about that over the past years, trying to educate people about that particular number. But then you get into things like the man-made lakes. And I love to use Lake Travis as an example. Man created that particular lake, which creates more humidity around the Austin area. And so is the humidity changing the weather? Is humidity causing it to get warmer in Austin? Do we need to get rid of the lakes that supply water to hundreds of thousands of people in the Austin area? I don't think that would be a good idea, but it would certainly reduce the humidity, and that would reduce the temperature in Austin if we did get rid of those lakes. So does man have an impact on climate? Yeah, asphalt, concrete, lakes, things like that are actually causing it to warm in urban areas that man is doing. But the burning of fossil fuels, that debate is out. And that's why the science is clearly not settled on that front. We are producing greenhouse gas emissions. But when you look at our atmosphere, it's 0.04% is carbon dioxide, this gas that's necessary for life on Earth. And it's slightly increasing. Man's contributions to that is such a small fraction of the CO2 in the atmosphere. But what scientists are showing is happening through satellites is that our Earth is greening. That's why I joke, are the left and climate alarmists going to put bumper stickers that say save the deserts? Because we're actually losing desert space now on Earth and having more farmland that's available for the developing world. I think that's a good thing that we're actually greening the Earth and having more land to produce more food for hungry people around the planet. Call me crazy, but I think that's a good thing. So as man is having a very, very minimal impact, I certainly don't think that we're warming the planet. And there are paleoclimatologists now that say that man's contributions of greenhouse gas emissions over the last 800 years are not having an impact on temperature, that the sun is the driver of temperature, and that's increasing the CO2 emissions, not the other way around. Imagine that this big ball in the sky is what's actually warming our planet as we come out of an ice age. So I would imagine that people have come out of ice ages before. It probably got warmer, and the planet is warming.
There was a period during America's founding era, they called it the Little Ice Age because of the massive amounts of snow and extreme cold, like Valley Forge and so forth. The Earth goes through cycles, but that number is astounding. You're saying that of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, I'm going to flip it on you, and hopefully I get my math right, 99.96% is natural, only 0.04% comes from our activity.
Yeah, it's a very, very small percentage of what comes from our activity. And it's only 0.04% of the atmosphere. We're at trace levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. There are people that alarmists want to get us to below 350 parts per million. We're at about 420 parts per million. When you do the math, that's where you get the 0.04%. If we get below 350 parts per million, then plants start dying. It becomes catastrophic for the survival of mankind. And that kind of gets me back to maybe that's what these people that don't have faith and beliefs really want. They think that there's too many humans on the planet, and I couldn't disagree more.
That goes into a couple things. Let's go ahead and go there. The first thing is worldview, Jason. We're a Christian ministry here. We believe in the Bible, and the Bible seems like people are always attacking the Bible. Oh, this is a fake. This is a myth. You give it enough time, though, eventually the evidence is going to come out and prove that the Bible is right. No one's ever disproven it. And there's a scripture verse I want to share with you and with the audience in today's show, and it's in Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. It says, "While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." That tells me a couple things. Number one is there are rhythms and cycles in the earth. And number two, God has set the earth up so that it will last and support mankind until he's done with this place. And I don't know if that's how you read it, but can you comment on that from, I assume you're a Christian. If not, how does that verse strike you?
I agree completely. I have faith in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I've accepted him into my life. And that faith gives me the optimism that I have. that this earth will be here long before I am, and want to make it as good for the next generation, but also get others to experience the economic opportunity and prosperity that we have here. I went to go do this work when I was leaving the legislature. My boys, much younger at the time, said, "Dad, what are you going to go do?" And I told them, I said, "I'm going to go work to end poverty around the world."
Oh, praise
And
God.
they were kind of taken back, like, "Wait, how do you do that?" I said, "You do that with access to energy. Energy poverty is poverty." I'd love to support an energy or an association called Bettering Human Lives. They're working on getting clean cooking fuels to people in developing country that are cooking with dung, that are cooking with biofuels that are dirty when they burn them.
Yeah.
And so when you can replace that with propane, something again that we produce in excess here in the United States and produce it more responsibly than anywhere on the face of the earth, if we can get that to people around the world, you're going to change their lives and free up a significant amount of time so that they can get involved in communities. They can go to church, they can go to worship, they can study their faith, they can raise families, they can experience clean air, clean cooking fuels, economic prosperity. And that's how you end poverty, is by getting people access to that energy. And so I love the work that I'm doing. I'm led by my faith and my guidance. I believe one of my favorite verses, therefore encourage one another and build each other up. And so that's what I try to do with access to energy, and then educating the general public here in the United States specifically that unfortunately has too much time on their hands, that they get to worry about problems that just don't exist.
Well, brother, you alluded to the Earth is getting greener, and how if we achieve these so-called climate goals, we're going to endanger plant life on the Earth, or at least make it a whole lot harder. The Earth is actually growing greener. Back in the 60s, there was a book written called The Population Bomb, and we were told back then, leading up to the Earth Day and all this, that overpopulation, we're going to consume all of our resources, and we're going to have hundreds of millions of people die, and all of this kind of alarmism. It's been one climate scare after another since then, with global cooling, then we have the energy crisis, then we have the ozone layer. I covered a lot of this in my monologue, but we're now, in 1960, we had 2.6 billion people on the planet. Today, we've got 8.4. So we're approaching 4 times as many, and I think we're doing fine on population growth and natural resources and stuff. From a philosophical perspective, what's going on here? Why do we have these climate scares, and why do so many people love to jump on these bandwagons and, the sky is falling routine?
I think it's a lack of faith. I really think that's what it boils down to, is they have just been perverted by evil to believe the things that they believe that are just inherently not true. You mentioned the 60s. In the time frame since the 60s, 40% of that global population that you mentioned was just over 2 billion people. 40% of the population lived in abject poverty. By today's terms, that's making less than $2 a day. And what happened in 2020? That number dropped below 8%.
Wow.
And our population had quadrupled at the time. We are succeeding in our efforts. Now, unfortunately, we saw an uptick for the first time in over 40 years of people moving back into abject poverty. That's moving in the wrong direction. That has since been corrected over the last year as energy becomes more predominant, as we produce more energy here in the United States, lower the cost of a barrel of oil, which is a great thing. But we're pulling people out of poverty, and our population has quadrupled. During the last 100 years, people dying from weather-related events has decreased 99.5%.
Amazing.
I mean, these are miraculous improvements because we have access to the ability to leave weather-related events. We have the ability to hunker down. We have better infrastructure than we had 100 years ago. Life is just so much more prosperous now, primarily because of hydrocarbons. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing that I think people should be happy and optimistic for, and hope that the rest of the world gets to experience what we get to experience here in the United States.
Do you remember, I think it was in the 80s, 70s, 80s, we were told there was an energy crisis and that the world was going to run out of oil. I remember hearing that in high school and going, oh my goodness, this is bad. What are we going to do? We haven't run out of oil. We're not even close to running out of oil. There's tons of oil under the ground. What are your thoughts about that? Where did that alarmism come from?
Oh, we hear this all the time. We're at peak oil. We're at peak shale. We heard this back in the 70s. And I get asked in conferences sometimes when I'm speaking up on stage, what are you going to do when we run out of oil? And I said, well, hopefully God will give us another Texan and we'll go find some more. And sure, just lo and behold, just in the last couple of days, there's been a massive discovery of
Of
oil
new
reserves
Texans.
in the Permian Basin. A massive discovery of oil in the Permian Basin that people didn't know about, like 1.4 billion barrels of oil available. It's a little deeper, it's a little harder to get to, but the shale revolution that really took off just in the last 15 years, people thought we were done and that we had reached peak oil. And that completely changed everything. Natural gas in the early 2000s in Texas was selling for over $10. Today, it's selling for around $3 or $4. So we've increased production. We're using it more for electric generation. We're exporting it around the planet to help our friends and allies, get to experience what we do. But yeah, the whole peak oil, peak shale, peak coal, those things are absolutely absurd. There's more than there what we need to live for. It'll last 100 or at least 1,000 years of reserves that we know about
Wow.
now.
Gosh,
Every year we keep finding more and more reserves that we didn't know about.
that's amazing. So, what about nuclear energy, Jason? Is it something we should be pursuing as a country? I mean, there's nuclear waste. It has to be stored, but otherwise, as long as there's no meltdown, nuclear energy is clean and safe.
Yeah, it's the most dense form of energy that we have on the planet. If you and I, our entire lives were powered by nuclear energy, that's our cars, our cooking, our home heating, everything that we use and consume was powered by nuclear energy, the waste at the end of our long, abundant lives would be equivalent to the size of a Coke can. That's
Wow.
how much waste we would produce. So, all the energy, all the nuclear waste today could be stored on a football field, and it would be, I think, 20 to 30 feet high is the number. So, we're not talking about a lot of waste. It's incredible dense energy. It's making a comeback in the United States. I think the marketing, the alarmism by some of the people on the left and in other countries were scaring the students at institutions of higher education. We're co opting nonprofits to go out and scare people about nuclear. I think people have kind of woken up to the realization that maybe we need more nuclear. Maybe it's affordable, it's reliable, it's dense, it's American made. We produce uranium right here in this country, and the waste is incredibly small. And what's incredible is what we've seen just in the last year is a new commitment to take what you mentioned is being stored now and recycling that. Something that this country did up until the Jimmy Carter administration when he stopped it with an executive order. We used to recycle spent fuel rods and get more enriched uranium out of them and use them to generate electricity. We're also going to take older weapons grade plutonium and recycle that and get more enriched uranium to make electricity. So the recycling in that front is coming back. It's something France and Russia have been doing since the 80s when we stopped doing it. But we've got to bring back our institutions of higher education and focus on creating the workforce to power these industries. You look at some of the petroleum institutes and petroleum centers and universities, they don't have enough students. They're going away. We need to reverse that to get more students interested in this to help solve the problems of tomorrow, but studying for it today.
Well, we have horror stories of Chernobyl and to some extent 3 Mile Island, although that doesn't even measure up to Chernobyl. But, in America, we had that event. How do we keep those things from happening again?
Yeah, even with those events, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, 0 deaths as a result of those meltdowns. Chernobyl, there was about 35 deaths due to exposed radiation over a serious period of time. You had some firefighters that died during that. Chernobyl was really poor construction, which is unfortunate. Fukushima was on a fault line at 3 Mile Island. Again, 0 deaths, though. That's one of the things that it makes it the safest, most dense form of energy on the planet. I think you're going to see more safety as we move forward because of American innovation and ingenuity. We're going to see smaller module reactors. These, instead of producing a gigawatt, we're going to see some that produce 5 megawatts. We're going to see some that produce 50 megawatts. These smaller energy systems that are great for baseload to power data centers. I think initially some of the data centers that are being built are going to be built and powered by on-site natural gas while the nuclear technology advances and gets developed and up to scale so that we are producing them on a factory and getting them to places around the United States. So it's going to be much smaller. It's going to be more modular. You can put it on the back of a truck and move it into a business park and power that business park for years to come. And I think that's where we're going with the technology. We should see 3 reactors, these small modular reactors, come online this year on July 4th, 2026 is the goal of the Department of Energy. And I know Chris Wright well. I believe him. I have faith in him. And I think he's going to flip that switch, and those 3 are going to power on. And it's going to be a great thing for American economic prosperity moving forward as we reindustrialize this country and do it on the back of great baseload power from nuclear.
Well, that's kind of exciting. July 4th, are they going to have fireworks?
Hopefully not around the nuclear reactors, but I know there will be fireworks that day.
Yeah. So your website says that America has cut air pollution by 80% in the last 50 years. That's a really amazing statistic. I remember back in the 70s, and 80s, seeing, pictures of LA or New York or any of the major cities of America, and there's sort of this shroud of brown that covers them. Have we effectively dealt with the smog problem and the air quality problem in our country? And by the way, were fossil fuels the problem in the first place, or was it just not that we didn't have the technology to filter out the stuff that was polluting the air?
You look back at that same time frames, there were the rivers around Pittsburgh were on fire.
Literally.
I mean, there was just really a good lack of pollution control. It was something that consumers started to demand in automobile vehicles. Hey, what can we do to reduce the pollution coming out of these automobiles? And so in the 60s, catalytic converter was invented and implemented onto cars before the Clean Air Act. So industry was moving in the right direction to reduce pollution. Then politicians, I joke, they passed a Clean Air Act so they could pat themselves and say they did something that was already happening. But it's the technology. And as I've testified multiple times, I tell members of Congress, I say, of all the technology the Chinese steal from us, it would be nice if they would utilize our pollution control technology. And we started using bag houses and scrubbers for dust mitigation to capture particulate matter, the things that cause smog. And so we're world leaders in clean air in this country, having reduced pollution nearly 80% over the last 5 decades. That's an incredible track record. We proved it because during the COVID lockdowns, we took half the cars off the road for about a 2-month period around this country. And during those 2 months, our air quality did not improve. In some cities, it got worse. And what it proved during those 2 months of the COVID lockdowns, we can shut industry down. We can take half the cars off the road. It proved that our air quality in this country was practically at a natural state. That we've probably gone too far on some of our regulations. They drive up costs significantly to manufacture things. That's why the Trump administration is working to bring those into that improve human health. That don't go beyond anything about that, because environmental policy should serve mankind, not the other way around. And for too long, mankind has been pushing environmental policy onto us at our detriment. But again, we've proven our environmental leadership with our clean air because of the implementation of things like bag houses and scrubbers. So we really can't improve the air quality here in the United States. The only way we can improve the air quality here in the United States is get our trading partners to agree to standards that improve human health. Over 60% of the pollution in Southern California is Asian air pollution that has made its way across the Pacific over 1 to 4 weeks in the troposphere and the atmosphere. It's come into the United States. So that's the only way we can improve the air quality here in the United States is, again, to get our trading partners to improve human health. When the Olympics are in China, they shut down the industry. They shut everything down weeks before, hoping to improve the environment and the air quality for the athletes that are going to be there and the image that they're going to be portraying around the world. But as soon as the Olympics are gone, they fire back up the industry. They don't care about environmental protection. They don't care about human rights. They don't use a pollution control technology that we do, and I wish they would.
That is amazing. I have never heard that before about Southern California. That's an incredible fact. If you were just to watch mainstream media, Jason, you would get the impression that the United States is the bad guy, that we're the ones that are creating climate change and polluting the world with all of our fossil fuels. But yet you have China and India who are virtually, I don't want to say virtually unregulated, but is that true? They virtually don't really try to stop this. And what are we going to do to, we could regulate ourselves into poverty and it won't fix the situation. Am I right on that?
Yeah, you really are. And I think the current administration has woken up to the realization that we were losing jobs, that we were deindustrializing. You look at Germany, probably the world's biggest leader, and I don't know if leader is the best term to use, but they had embraced this energy transition. Just in the last couple of weeks, Mercedes has announced they're closing down an automobile manufacturing facility in Germany because costs are too high. They're moving it to Hungary. BASF, a world leading chemical components company, has shut down operations in Germany, citing high energy costs, moving operations to China. It's cheaper to do things there. They have cheap, reliable electricity on the back of coal without pollution control technology. So their electricity costs are extremely cheap. China has begun to export energy for the first time ever. They're exporting diesel, jet fuel, and home heating oil on because they're powering those refineries that they've expanded over the last few years with coal. They're building 1 to 2 coal-fired power plants a week in China to provide affordable, reliable energy. And here in the United States, our Secretary of Energy has to issue emergency actions to keep coal plants online because the utilities want to shut those down. They want to pass on higher costs to their ratepayers. They're guaranteed a rate of return between 9 and 11% on our back. It's one of the reasons why electricity disconnects are on the rise here in the United States. Between 2022 and 2023, there was a 30% increase, Richard, of people that were getting disconnected from their electric utility. It was a 76% increase in people getting disconnected from natural gas. So when the electricity fails, you turn on natural gas, maybe a fireplace, maybe an oven to keep your home somewhat warm. Your furnace may run on natural gas. Your water heater may run on natural gas. So you had some sort of backup. But we've seen a massive increase in these people because of the increase in cost in the US. This is an appalling direction to be heading because those people are at the greatest risk of homelessness. You buy a new home, you have a homeowner's insurance policy, or you sign a lease, you're required to keep your utilities on. And I think this administration has seen what's happened in Germany. They've seen what's happening in the United Kingdom. They're losing industry, and it's because power is expensive. So they're doing everything they can to keep affordable, reliable power on coal, natural gas, and nuclear from early retiring, getting new generation built that we can count on with American fuels.
Coal has been a whipping boy of the left for a while now, but is that fear about coal-based energy based on facts, or is it more some kind of unhinged ideology going on here? After I've asked the question, let me preface it. I told you, I think before we went live, that I had the opportunity to go to Craig, Colorado, and I met with a guy there, just happened to meet with him, who worked at a coal power plant there. And he said that their plant, the air that is put out of the plant, the exhaust, if you will, the air is actually cleaner than the air that we breathe. And he also talked about their reclamation work on ground where they mine and stuff, and that the earth, that when they put it back together after they're done, is in better shape than when they got there. And yet the state of Colorado will not allow energy providers in this state to buy energy from that coal plant. What are your thoughts? Can we have coal as a basis for energy in America and have it clean and still have clean air?
Yeah, absolutely. And we proved that over the decades. We can and we should. Unfortunately, there's been a couple of things that have been attacking coal. It's this cult-like fascination with decarbonization, getting rid of CO2 in the atmosphere, which does nothing to mitigate a changing climate, just makes everything more expensive. We've had policymakers that have embraced that so-called energy transition. And then unfortunately, you had people in the oil and gas industry that were bashing coal, hoping to take market share from them. But you look during cold spells, sometimes pipelines freeze. Their compressors are powered by electricity. If the electricity goes out in that compressor, it should be running on the fuel in the pipeline. But because of the Environmental Protection Agency from decades ago, mandated they run on electricity. But sometimes those go out. What doesn't go out is a rail car full of coal that you can just move right into a power plant and produce more electricity. So I tell people the best battery there is 6 months worth of coal in a rail car that's got a tarp covered over it so it's keeping it dry. That's the best battery we can have. Natural gas is a great supply of electricity. It's great at ramping up and ramping down and meeting demand. But those couple of things, the decarbonization, the cult-like fascination with getting rid of CO2, which would end all life on Earth as we know it, which I'm kind of a fan of my high carbon lifestyle. I'd like to keep on living, get more CO2 into the atmosphere, and then industry. And that's one of the great things about the American Energy Institute. We represent companies that are in the oil and gas and coal space and nuclear. And it's one of our things, like members, we're not going to bash the other. We're going to promote affordable and reliable energy. We're not for all of the above. All of the above includes things that are heavily dependent on subsidies and the Chinese supply chain that are neither affordable nor reliable. I'm talking about wind, solar, and batteries. We're for affordable and reliable American energy, not all of the above. So we've got some great members that are in the industry that are embracing that messaging to lift people out of poverty around the world.
Amazing. Well, let's talk for just a minute about electric cars. You know, until we realized that Elon Musk was a Republican, electric cars were the thing. You know, this was what was going to save the planet, right? Electric cars, that's the way to go, with ESV mandates and government subsidies and all government fleets switching over to electric vehicles and all this kind of stuff. Is it true, though, Jason, that to produce an electric vehicle actually takes more energy than it saves?
Yeah, it really does. It takes about over 10 years ownership of an EV for that benefit analysis to work itself out, that it'll actually, you know, if carbon is your thing, it's over 10 years to be carbon neutral. But no one keeps electric vehicles that long. You have to replace the batteries after 7 to 8 years. So that completely wipes out that theory. The technology is fantastic. I had an opportunity to be in a couple of Cybertrucks recently. I love the full self-driving mode. It's fantastic, amazing technology that'll improve safety on the roads. And I'm okay with people owning EVs. I just don't want to pay for them. And I don't want to force other people to pay for them. So the American Energy Institute, we've done extensive research to show members of Congress and state legislators around the country of how much they're subsidizing EVs. And so, yeah, I saw an EV recently with a bumper sticker that says anti-Elon Tesla Club. You know, it was just so funny. I've also seen others that say can't roll without coal, natural gas, and nuke, which I love. You know, but they're great technological advances.
Yep.
But they're not for everybody, and everybody shouldn't be paying for them. And what we expose in some of our research is that taxpayers, ratepayers, and purchasers of internal combustion engine vehicles were paying upwards of $100,000 per electric vehicle sold. So these electric vehicles were really, in some cases, costing over $200,000 to produce, manufacture, and sell, namely the Ford Lightning truck, which sold at about $100,000. They were losing about $100,000 per truck. And then you and I were pitching in over $60,000 for that truck. So every single gas and diesel vehicle sold in the US in 2023 had a $2,200 minimum upcharge to pay for the losses from electric vehicles and to cover the corporate average fuel economy credits that Ford, GM, and Stellantis were having to buy from Elon Musk. It's where Tesla made $2 billion in revenue. They would barely have been profitable if it weren't for selling these fake arbitrary credits that were created by the government. The Trump administration has gotten rid of those subsidies. So you still have some states that subsidize them, but those are going away too as people get more and more mad at Elon, which I'm like, hey, if that's fine. I hate to see people bicker and argue and fight, but as long as we get closer to free markets and more affordability, I'm for that.
Well, I think electric cars are cool, but I think it ought to be up to people to buy them if they want to, and it's not going to save the planet. But let me mention another issue, if we can get this in before the end of the show here, Jason, is Donald Trump proved, it was kind of a shocker, I think, to most people, but he proved this in his first administration. When America has abundant energy and we can actually become a net energy exporter, even oil exporter, is it a national security interest? Is it a vital aspect of national security for us to be independent and not dependent on foreign oil?
Yeah, it really is. You look at our refining capacity along the Gulf coast of the United States, it hasn't grown in decades. We need to expand that, and that's expanded with access to energy that we produce right here. But we are a net exporter of energy. Unfortunately, we're still dependent on some heavy crude coming in. So that comes in from Canada, that comes in now from Venezuela, it comes in from the Middle East. Look at California, 21% of the oil they import for their refineries comes in from Iraq. 20% comes in from Brazil. And California is standing right over it, but they've really taken this European model that, we're going to keep it in the ground, to the detriment of the people that live in California and the surrounding states that are dependent on some of their energy. So we absolutely do. It is incredibly, critically dependent on access to energy, and producing that energy here in the United States has led to the greatest national security de-escalation because we have that energy. We're no longer dependent on the Middle East for it. So we do need to produce more. We're somewhere upwards of 13, 14 million barrels per day. We're world leaders in the production of oil and gas. We're working on exporting that gas in the form of liquefied natural gas. This is really good. Unfortunately, some of these countries, I mentioned Germany, the other countries in the EU and the UK, that are sitting over it. They're sitting over it, but they won't produce it. And that's completely detrimental to the people that they're supposed to serve, these elected officials, but they've bought into this decarbonization agenda and they think getting it from America is going to get rid of CO2 emissions. It's absolutely not. And it's absurd to even focus on that in the first place.
Well, Jason, let's close with this subject. You mentioned earlier in the show something called ESG. It's a leftist acronym, one of those three-letter things out there, but it stands for Environment, Social Governance. And it's basically the World Economic Forum and the leftist elite in the world trying to impose a China-like structure on the world, controlling thought, controlling speech, controlling what you say and believe, punishing those who don't carry the approved narrative and favoring those who do. Has your organization suffered from ESG? Because I saw that Hartford did something kind of nasty to you. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we have a small office where we're broadcasting from. And I have an insurance policy. I went to our insurance agent who does a lot of my policies. And I said, hey, I just need a policy for this small office. The lease is requiring it. And then I get a policy from the Hartford. And I was like, oh, gosh, of course, all companies I've got to get from the Hartford. But I took it. It was much cheaper and just had to meet the requirements of the lease. And then a few months go by and I get a letter from the Hartford that says, we've noticed from your Facebook page that you are an energy trade organization that promotes American energy, and we can no longer extend your insurance coverage.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, someone went in and dug into my Facebook page and looked at the fact that we are an energy trade organization, which was disclosed when we signed our lease. I mean, it's right in our name, American Energy Institute. And so they refused to extend our policy. They're discriminating against me for viewpoint. It's really called viewpoint discrimination. And then the fact that they're discriminating against American energy producers and American energy trade organizations. And I knew this was going to happen. I was hopeful that it would happen, quite honestly, because years ago, Hartford said, we're no longer going to make insurance policies for companies that produce coal, that produce forestry products, and that produce oil and gas. I'm thinking,
Wow.
Could you be any more anti-Texan? So it happened. It's brought a lot of negative attention to Hartford. State attorneys generals are now investigating them. They're investigating BlackRock, Vanguard, at State Street. These organizations that have been manipulating markets and acting as a cartel to drive energy production down in the United States when we should be going up. They deny access to capital. They deny access to insurance services. It is discrimination at its worst. We've done a great job exposing it and helping write policies that have been adopted in multiple states around the country to get a correction on this error.
Yeah, that's great. And Texas has adopted some legislation on this, prohibiting financial services companies, I think, from discriminating against people based on their viewpoints and that sort of thing. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, actually, I got to write the language of the first bill that became law. It was Senate Bill 13 in 2021 that says if you boycott fossil fuels, you can no longer do business with the state of Texas. It's resulted in multiple institutions pulling billions of dollars out of a company like BlackRock, head by the co-chairman of the World Economic Forum, who has pushed ESG down our throats and forced us to this political agenda of decarbonization. So it was great because I got to define what boycott meant. And if they were forcing a company to do something that was outside of their ordinary business purpose, it was deemed boycotting. And so when you force a company to comply with the Paris agreements, which I think are treasonous, the Paris Accords have not been ratified by Congress. The U.S. has pulled out of them. And if for a company to force companies that they've invested in with pension dollars, of all things, to comply with a foreign treaty that's not the law of the land of the United States, I think it's treasonous.
Thank you so much, Jason Isaac, American Energy Institute, for joining us on Truth and Liberty today. It's been fantastic. Let me remind folks about a free copy of my booklet, The Calling to Manhood. Just go to truthandlibertygtn.com today and get your free copy. God bless you all. Be sure to join us again next time here on Truth and Liberty.